All right. Welcome, all of us who are here for the Call for Abstracts tutorial training. I'm Leanne Ferguson. Oh, good. We just had someone else jump on too. So we'll welcome them in a second. We just got started. My name is Leanne Ferguson. I'm the Executive Director for the Southern Gerontological Society. I'm also a PhD student in the doctoral program at Concordia University in Gerontology and Leadership. I am joined with Dr. Turner Goins from Western Carolina University and Dr. Graham Rolls from the University of Kentucky, along with the SGS student representative, Debbie Yoder. And I will let you all introduce yourself. I see Latricia Perry. I'll let you say a few words about yourself.
Okay, so I am also a PhD student at Concordia in Leadership and Gerontology. I'm also the Interim Associate Dean at Nevada State College. We're actually here in Henderson, but I live in Las Vegas. And I have submitted abstracts, but never anything specific to gerontology. And so I was just looking for any tidbits that might be helpful as I move forward in this direction.
We're so glad to have you here. And I see Kay Jason. That's all I have of your name. So I'll let you give us a little bit more details about yourself, if she can hear us. I hope she can. All right, I see her. Hang on a second. We want to make sure everybody's connected properly. Okay, well, hopefully she'll get her audio working here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. When I share my screen, Dr. Rolls is going to take over to talk about some of the bullet points about the abstract submission process, what it is that SGS does in terms of their software. We're going to just kind of cover every base. But if at any point anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in and just ask them. We're going to keep this real informal. And here we go with the screen share. Hopefully you can all see this in just a minute. Okay. Can you guys see my desktop?
Yes.
So we're going to go with from current slides. Okay, Graham, it's all yours.
Okay. Well, welcome to everybody. And I'm basically, when I was thinking about what would be best to share, I tried to look at a variety of different sources and come up with what I think are kind of 10 useful tips for writing a conference abstract. And these are tips for abstracts in general. So a few of the comments may not apply to specifically SGS for this conference. Most of them will, but we wanted to have something that would be guidelines that could be used at any conference that you would submit to. One of the first things to do is to think about the degree to which the project you have fits within a conference program track. Most conferences have various tracks of areas of emphasis that they want to organize their conference around. It's not necessary to have a direct link to a track in order to submit an abstract. Some conferences have an open category, which is basically if you don't happen to feel you fit in any of the tracks, you submit the abstract anyway. It is useful, however, if the conference does have conference tracks, to try and identify your project or make it link in as far as possible with one of those tracks. Partly because when people are reviewing your abstract, one of the criteria, which is often explicit, is does this submission fit within one of our conference tracks? So my recommendation is, if you can, to try and see if your submission fits within a particular conference track. And you can stretch things quite a long way when you do that. Are there any questions or comments on that one? I propose to go through each one of these, and many of them have a lot more detail for a discussion on this. And so I figured I'd pause between each one. And if anybody wanted to add something, Turner, if you wanted to add something, I believe SGS is asking you this year to identify a track for all abstracts. Is that correct, Leanne?
Yep, that is correct. And I know that sometimes it becomes real intimidating to have to pick a track, but those are so loosely woven in terms of how a lot of things really can fit within a track. It's okay to be a little bit outside the box. If the program committee feels like it really will fit better in another track, they're going to ask you for permission to place it in that track. So there is some guidance with that process, not to be intimidated by.
And actually, I've never been to a conference where I've heard somebody said, well, that paper really shouldn't have been in this track.
Yeah.
So if there's no questions on that, let's move to the second one. And this is an important one, and this depends a little bit on where you are with your research or with your project that you want to share. And that is to decide on your preferred format. Many conferences have a wide array of formats: workshops, symposia, papers, posters. Now, if you're invited to submit to a symposia, there's really no decision to be made. But in distinguishing between a workshop or a paper and a poster, there's two things that you may want to bear in mind. The first is, what is the medium for presenting your work at this stage of its development? People present and are encouraged to present at conferences when they have research projects at different stages of development. And so for some people, it is how they're designing their project, how that project is getting underway. For others, it's a project that's pretty much completed. And so it's really sharing findings. For others, it's a project that's in process where they'd really like to get a lot of feedback from people in attendance to the conference. And so if I would recommend that if you're at a very early stage, you might want to participate in a workshop on that particular topic. If you're at a stage where you're working on your project, you've got some findings, you've got some ideas, you may want to present a poster, because that maximizes your opportunity to get some feedback from participants in the conference that's beyond the simple question, one answer that occurs if you're in a paper session. You can actually have an in-depth conversation. And I would argue for many people, particularly when they're starting, to go to a poster session is really the best way to get started, because you get some in-depth conversation with people who can be supportive. And that really links to that second point, which is, what kind of feedback do you want to receive for your presentation? Do you just want thunderous applause as you leave the stage from your presenting your paper? Do you want feedback in depth from somebody that you can actually develop a linkage with? I found that presenting posters is a really good idea for developing relationships that can be developed way beyond the conference, and for getting insight on things you'd never even thought about in terms of your poster. And so I strongly recommend for people to consider the poster option, particularly if their project is in process. I don't know if there's other questions on that at this point. If not, we can move on to the next item, which is basically rule number 1, 1, 1, and 1. And that is, follow the guidelines and the instructions to the letter. Use the required format. If they have headings that they want you to use, use it. Having been on the other side of the abstract review process as well, as a reviewer, you may have 100 abstracts that you're looking at. And essentially what you're looking for is an abstract that you can look at, get a good sense of, as we'll talk about it a little bit later, and make a decision on. Nothing makes people more angry, okay, than having an abstract that's in the wrong format and that's not appropriately presented. We'll talk about proofreading a little bit later, but make sure you follow the guidelines and use the headings if they want a method. Even if you're doing a qualitative study that doesn't require a method in the sense of a formal method, use something under that heading. Do not, under any circumstances, exceed the word limit, period. That's it. And in fact, some organizations will not even consider your abstract if it's 2 words over. Okay? So please don't. The one thing that's ambiguous on that sometimes is what counts for the word limit. Does at the top of the abstract where you put your name and you put your affiliation, and does that count towards the abstract or not? In most cases, it doesn't. But you may want to check that out with the conference organizers, ship an email on that if you're concerned about that. There's an advantage to having a word limit. And in the case of SGS for our conference, it's 250 words. And that advantage is you tend to get much tighter abstracts. And we're going to talk about editing a little bit later on. In fact, you can say a lot in 250 words if you say it appropriately. But the message here is, again and again and again, follow the guidelines and instructions, because people who are reviewing your abstract will want you to do that. Any comments, questions? Yeah.
I have a question. Yeah. With this new submission software that we're using, do you know, Leanne, does it let you know if you've exceeded the word limit? Does it let you continue to enter your abstract beyond the word limit?
It definitely counts your words as you're typing them in, and it will not let you go past 250.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely.
Yeah, one of the things you may want to do is to make sure that you have completed your abstract before you sign in to submit the abstract. You have it there, because there's nothing worse than going through and then it cuts you off and your punchline right at the end is not accepted, and then you have to figure out how to go back and change things on site. So. Sorry. Any other comments on that? So why don't we move next to the next item, which is, so what should be in your abstract? And if you could click again, Leanne, I think there's an item D and an item E. Is that right? Well, we'll just go through what we've got so far anyway. And we'll just kind of move
I got it. Okay, there it is.
Okay. All right. So the first thing you need to do, remember, this person who's looking at your abstract is looking at maybe 30, 50, 100, we don't know how many. And basically the thing to do with an abstract is to start with a issue or problem statement that can be very brief, very punchy, that catches the person's attention. It's a hook to link you to the reviewer to immediately understand what the topic is about. This paper is about race relations in the South. This paper is about falls among persons with Alzheimer's disease. Immediately, a quick hook to exactly what this is about and what the topic is. As a reviewer, I'm looking at this. You know, one of our priorities is looking at falls in Alzheimer's disease. Bing, oh, this is an abstract I've got to look at. And basically summarize as quickly as you can the issue that's involved. Do not write an introduction. This is not a paper. Your paper and presentation can have an introduction, but no introduction. No references. Okay. And basically for each of these elements, generally speaking, and certainly with 250 word limit, no more than a sentence on any of these. This is not writing the paper, this is writing an abstract. Right? So once you have identified the problem, this paper looks at falls with persons with Alzheimer's disease, the next sentence should be, how did you address this problem? So that would be, we did a qualitative study, okay, or we did a survey. And often you can link these. So for example, you could say something like, addressing the problem of falls in persons with Alzheimer's disease, this qualitative study involved in-depth interviews with 60 people. You've covered some of these requirements just in that one sentence. So the second part of this should be, how was the problem or issue addressed? It could be a review of the literature, it could be a survey, it could be, you name it, looking at some data sets, who knows? And so you basically talk next about your research and the data collection. Now we're talking, remember, about 2 sentences here. We're not talking about a lot of writing. Third, what did you do with it? How did you analyze this data? How was the information collected, or how was it processed? How did you make a sense of it? All right. We had 6 independent coders look at this. Or we did a content analysis of the interviews. It can be basically how it was approached, how it was analyzed. And then D here on that list is the findings. What did you find out? okay? Now here, this is absolutely critical, and as a reviewer, this is how I basically throw out, if I have to throw out a certain number of abstracts, how I decide whether they get thrown out or not. And basically, the kiss of death, if you write something like, findings will be presented at the conference, you're dead in the water, okay? Don't ever use that phrasing. I'm sounding very strong in this advocacy, but don't do that. Because basically it says to the reviewer, you haven't done anything, got it ready. You're basically putting in a speculation, and basically, at the conference, because we want a really good conference, we may or may not get anything useful. And given that I have 30 other abstracts, this is one which I can just throw out right now. So don't ever use any variation of the findings will be presented. Now, it may well be, and often is, that you haven't got a complete, smooth, pristine project. Absolutely. And to be honest with you, most abstracts are like that, because you're reporting research or study in process. All right? So essentially the thing to do is to sit down for yourself and think very carefully about, well, what are the things that appear to be coming out, or that I think is going to come out of this pretty strongly. And so it's always, I found useful to do something like 3 sets of findings, or among the 3 groups of findings, or 2 sets of findings. You're being very precise without really actually saying anything, but you're being very precise about the nature of the findings. So you could say the findings on falls, the person with Alzheimer's disease related, first of all, to the nature of the physical environment, second to the nature of social support received, and third to areas of clothing, okay, and footwear in particular. Now, you don't have all your data on that yet, but from setting up your project and working with your project, it's going to be in those areas. And so as a reviewer, I say, okay, all right, the role of clothing and footwear, the role of environment, that's kind of interesting. And so you're still in my pile. You're not in my reject pile at this particular point. So it's really important to summarize the findings, and as much as you can, make them look as if it is a completed project. I'm not asking you to be dishonest. I'm not asking anybody to be dishonest. But basically, if I'm going to this conference to read your presentation, what am I going to find out? Okay? So that's your 4th sentence. All right? Your 5th sentence is basically answering the question, so what? Okay? So what do these findings mean? Well, they mean that I get a paper at a conference. Well, congratulations. But basically, conference attendees may not be that interested in the fact that you're getting a paper in the conference. All right. So what does this mean? What is its significance? The findings, for example, let's use our example. The findings point to the need to spend much more time than we have previously in looking at the footwear of persons with Alzheimer's disease. I'm just using that as obviously an example, but you need to have at the end of that abstract a so what thing. Because as a reviewer of your abstract, I'm going to say, what is the value of this presentation going to be to people attending the conference? What is their takeaway message they can get of this? Oh, they go to your poster and they can find out the importance of footwear, for example. All right. So those elements are essential, and you have to do that in 250 words. All right. My strong recommendation is to have the whole abstract done, as you'll see from future things I'm going to suggest, well before you even develop the submission process. There's one other element involved in this. I think there's an F, right? Is there? I believe there is, right. Keywords, okay? Many conferences don't require you to use keywords, okay? Obviously, if they're required, you put them in. If it's not required and not asked for of the abstract, do not put in keywords. Give them exactly what they want, okay, as reviewers, okay? Are there any kind of questions on this part of it? Comments, elaborations, critiques?
Yeah, I don't find that I have any specific questions, but I would definitely say this is the most challenging part for me, just getting started with, okay, what do they want? And I can see it outlined, but my mind kind of plays that game as far as, am I doing what I need to do? So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Well, a little bit later on, we'll be able to show another couple of ways in which you can get this kind of feedback, because you don't need to be doing this just by yourself without feedback. And I think feedback is a key process that we'll talk about a little bit later on. If we move now to the, are there any other questions? I'm sorry. Okay, if we move on to the next item, and I believe, Leanne, we're going to be asking for this in SGS this year. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. To tie into our CEU accreditation, we needed to make sure that each presentation had specific learning goals or outcomes stated in the abstract process.
And this becomes increasingly important if you're going to go to a good conference, because good conferences often have CEU credits involved with them, like SGS. And so essentially, this is something that's going to be required increasingly if you want to go to conferences that are well respected. Basically, I find it difficult to write these learning outcomes, because basically, you know, one of them could be people will learn about interventions for Alzheimer's disease. Okay, fine, but that's helpful, believe it or not. So think about your project and say, what would people gain from attending your presentation? So for example, in the example that we're using, one might be participants will learn about the role of the environment in affecting falls with persons with Alzheimer's disease. It could be fairly specific or it could be fairly general. But basically the question is, what would a person gain from attending your presentation? And then you frame that as a set of objectives of your talk. This is also helpful for people as well, in the sense when they're assessing whether to show up at your talk or to show up at your poster. Okay. Any questions about that? I think others, Turner, you might have better comments than I would on this, because I'm not the person to consult on this one.
No, I have nothing. Everything you've said is exactly what I would have said.
Okay, good, good. At least we're on the same page. Okay.
You validated what I've heard over the years. What I say too.
If I could add here too, I like to think of the learning outcomes from a marketing perspective. So the abstract is really critical, and certainly people who are from the academic world appreciate the abstracts, but SGS welcomes such a diverse audience. Some of them are going to be very much more aligned in a practitioner-based work with direct work with older adults. And I think these learning outcomes really become the invitation to them, because they are looking for tools to add to their tool belt. And these learning outcomes really can speak to how it is this maybe workshop that might be on a very different topic would actually enhance that toolkit. So I like to think of it in that way. And I also think, you know, it's so important to know, or at least be able to semi-anticipate who your potential audience would be. So if I write something from an applied social work perspective, I'm probably writing these outcomes so they would align with social work CEUs or nursing CEUs or physician CEUs. So there's that anticipatory step too, in thinking about who will be in the audience and what kind of tools they'll be looking to gain.
Very, very, very helpful there. Are there other questions on the idea of learning outcomes that people have, or comments that people might want to offer on that? If not, let's move to some of the more kind of nuts and bolts ways of when you're actually producing this abstract. One of the things is, when you're doing an abstract, always try and think of who is reading the abstract. And in particular, because the idea is to get accepted to the conference, think about what will make that person impressed with your abstract. If I've read, it's the end of a long day, and I've been teaching all day or doing marketing all day or doing whatever it is all day, and I come home, and one of the things I volunteered to do in the evening, because most reviewers are volunteers, is to review abstracts for the upcoming conference of SGS or whoever it may be. And the worst thing I can get is, when I'm tired and stressed, it's a bunch of abstracts that I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Use that phrase, all right? And so it's like, I don't know, if I open an abstract and it says something like the neurophysiology of the ankle of persons who are suffering cerebral problems related to different forms of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease and Hicks disease, raises some interesting challenges for the ability of people to remain vertical. I'm probably first of all going to be asleep by the time it gets to the end of that. But second, you're just talking about people's legs and falling here. So the key point to make here is make the abstract intelligible to a reasonably educated person who may not be in your field. If you have a teenage son or daughter, have them read it because it makes sense to them. Edit to remove redundancy. And this is something that you do in the process as you're trying to get down to your 250 words. Because when you do your first attempt at this, you're going to end up with 300, 350 words, and you go, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? Well, basically, edit, edit, edit. And in fact, many of us would argue that having a 250 word limit is a great idea because it means parsimony. It means you're not going to be using a whole bunch of redundant words. And you'd be amazed at how concisely you can say things. You start off with the larger version, but keep the words simple and remove redundancy whenever. Have I said this twice? Am I using an extra word that I don't need to use? And the pressure of getting from 256 words to 250 will cut out 6 words that are probably redundant anyway. And so I would say this is a key issue for you, is to make your abstract fully intelligible to somebody who's reasonably educated. Any, and then the question becomes, well, what if my abstract involves some jargon that is technical and I can't avoid it? Well, try and think of a way that you could say that same thing in a simpler way, all right? Or at least in a way that people would at least know what you're leaning towards in terms of the idea that's there. Do your best. That's all you can do in that. Because as a reviewer, I'm reviewing stuff in areas I don't know anything about. So the more you can share with me in a way that I understand, the better it is. Any questions on that? I guess, Turner, you're a colleague on this. With anything to add to that one?
I can't think of everything. I mean, anything else that you haven't managed to touch on?
Okay.
I completely agree about succinct writing. It takes practice. And if you do it far enough in advance, you can just have somebody else read it and say, does this make sense to you?
And we're going to come to that as one of the next items, actually. In fact, why don't we look at that next?
Oh, brilliant.
Okay. And actually, Turner and I had not pre-scripted this, so this is the kind of the flow. We're in the flow. Give to a colleague to review and critique, okay? And that colleague doesn't have to be anybody in your field even. My wife, poor lady, has to review a whole bunch of stuff that I say, does this make sense? And then she usually says, Graham, no, it doesn't. And so my abstracts get better as a result of it. But do this. This is important. Give it to a colleague to review and critique. And as a colleague of those people, be willing to receive one and take it seriously, all right, the whole process. We're talking about read 250 words for me. Well, okay, it'll take a few minutes for them to do that. And so I think this is a critical thing to do as you're developing the abstract, because if we move to the next one, which kind of overlaps with this too, number 8 here, is basically listen to what your colleague says and then let the revised completed abstract sit for at least 24 hours. I don't know how many abstracts I have reviewed for conferences that somebody said, oops, I forgot. Oh, it's 12 o'clock and the abstracts for SGS are due by midnight tonight. I'll scribble something off. And they scribble something off, and guess what? It's not very good, okay? The thing that is really important is incorporate your colleague feedback, all right? Let the revised abstract sit for at least 24 hours. And I'm a last-minute person myself. But one of the things I do with all abstracts is make sure that I've got them completed 24 hours in advance and let them sit. because my mind then processes subconsciously what's involved in this. And basically I come back and I go, oh my gosh, there's 2 words that don't really say what I should be saying. And I can change that. Give yourself time. I can tell you the first criteria that I'll use when I throw out an abstract on this is one that's sloppily written. And I'm sorry, I'm not with you. I can deal with a lot of stuff if it's clear that the person has, it's a little ambiguous in terms of what their aims were, but it's carefully crafted and they clearly spent some time in it. I was reading something on abstracts as an aside here on doing abstracts. And that was a person who reviews thousands of abstracts. And what he said in what he wrote was, you have to somehow convey to the reviewer that you care and you are passionate about what it is that you're sharing. And that's to do with your phrasing, and it's to do with the very essence of what you're trying to present. Because I know at SGS, we want to have papers presented and posters presented from people who care about what they're doing. And you've got to share that you care on this. And in order to do that, you have to give yourself time to incorporate the advice of your colleagues and basically let it sit for 24 hours. And then we move to number 9, which is reread after this period, make any needed changes, and proofread. Please notice the capitals, okay, on this. Human beings reviewing these abstracts are, yes, human beings. And basically, they're spending the time when they could be watching something on TV, reading your abstract, and the fact that you've got 5 spelling errors in it that even a spell check could have picked up is not going to work in your favor. I use a principle of proofreading the final version at least 3 times. I have a cup of coffee in between the 3 times and that, because you have to remember this. Your abstract will appear in the conference program, and you don't want a permanent record of your tardiness. So if you go back on some old abstract books from GSA, you can find eminent professors' abstracts in there. And if you're lucky, you'll find one that shows typos and errors like that. And you go, boy, the standards weren't as good back then. But basically, I would love it that basically that everything that comes out from SGS, your abstracts from SGS, okay, are perfect. And so I really want to kind of emphasize that one. Any kind of comments on this and what we've talked about so far? Because the last thing I wanted to suggest is the easiest. Do you want to do number 10? And that one kind of speaks for itself. Submit. Submit. Okay. And if you follow these kinds of guidelines, what you submit will almost invariably be accepted. I have to say that. Unless you're in a conference, where they accept a very, very low percentage of the people who have applied to those conferences, in which case, if you haven't followed these rules or these suggestions, you're dead in the water anyway. Because if we've got 100 abstracts and we can only accept 20, what are my criteria for getting rid of them? People who haven't followed these previous steps, they're gone. Okay. So hopefully, to start the conversation at least, we can all be open to kind of questions and conversation right now. This will give you at least a rough framework as to how to proceed in producing an abstract.
This is Turner. I was gonna say, does it, in terms of like co-authors, I would think of the abstract just as if you would a manuscript. So, be thoughtful about who you feel like warrants co-authorship on the abstract.
Yeah, and one of the things that's often done is if you're working with a group of colleagues, it's kind of nice to make sure that the person who's the first author in the conference paper, and we're not talking necessarily about what's published, is the person who's actually going to be presenting it. So that you may have done a lot of the work and you can't go to the conference, and a student you're working with, or a colleague who's going to the conference, it's often a gracious thing to put them as the first author because they're going to be the one that's presenting it. And different people have different philosophies on that.
I think the website says something to that effect.
Good.
About
some I don't know, Leanne, does our website have you underline if the person who's going to present? Sometimes people do that in the list of authors.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you, because I've been asked that by students before who may have co-written a paper with a faculty member. The faculty member, however, is listed as first author, but the faculty member has no interest in presenting at the conference. Can the student then be the first author on the presentation at the conference?
I think they should talk. They should definitely, I don't see why not, but I think, you know, what I've learned in my career is you want to talk about authorship and order of authorship as soon and as early in the process as possible.
Yeah. Let
and
me
that
reinforce
to minimize
that,
hurt feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can't emphasize that enough. You know, if you're going to a conference like SGS, you're going to a conference and you're working with a faculty member and you're presenting some of her work as part of that you've been working on, the thing you do is say, okay, please, dear Madam Advisor, I'm putting this conference in. Should I be the first author on this conference presentation? Now, you're not going to be first author on their paper to the journal Science, but you're giving a conference paper, and one would hope that many mentors would say, yeah, that's fine. If you're, well, I'm not going to go there, but if your mentor is a senior full professor, she or he doesn't need a conference presentation on their CV, okay? On the other hand, it's something that really is beneficial to you. And so with regards to conference presentations, I think Turn is absolutely right. You have that conversation with your mentor and hope that she or he is understanding of this is part of your career development.
Thank you. Graham, if you'd like me to now, I can switch my screen over to show those who are on web video with us the actual conference abstract software that SGS uses that is very similar to other organizations. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, let's do it. Yes, okay. Absolutely.
All right, let me just do some scooting around here. For those of you who can see my screen, this is the SGS home website. It's just got a very glamorous makeover, and there is a lot of information here for you. So that it's not overwhelming, I'm just going to show you how you would get to a call for abstracts on a site like ours. And of course, there's a meeting tab here that speaks to the 2018 meeting. And there's two places. You can see the call for abstracts here under this sub-tab. You can also see that it's in a handy dandy little spot over here on the right side of the website where it says call for abstracts, open now and learn more. When you go to a call for abstracts page, it's basically going to tell you all you need to know about the type of tracks that are available, the type of presentation types, whether it's poster, workshop, symposium, mini workshops, panel type situations. And in our case, we've got a lot of information about our close date, which is coming up soon, December 15th. And of course, it gives you some abstract examples. And these examples we wrote this year to include what it would be like to write for a workshop versus a poster versus a paper presentation. So you can see there's different style differences in some of those cases, general guidelines. And then of course, there's where you get into the information you'll need to complete your submission. Sorry, I hope you can't see that my internet connection is unstable, but it is. And then of course, you get to click to the submit abstract. And this submit abstract goes to an external website. And for those of you who are SGS members or thinking about SGS membership, it's important to note, and this is true for a lot of organizations, that the abstract collection portal is completely separate from the membership software. And this is true in our case too. And I've already completed my profile, but you would need to complete your profile just like a new user to any website, enter all your details, and there's 5 steps. So you can tell that I'm on submission ID number 33, that I'm looking at the information, the authors. I put my name here, my institution. If I wanted to add new authors, I would easily just click the button where it says add new authors, and it would ask me the information about those types of authors, if they have a professional licensure, a license information, the institution, department, their job title, their address. It's really important to be able to provide the majority of this information. It helps the program committee align continuing education units, especially with licensures and credentials. And at the very bottom here, it's going to ask you if you are a member of either the Southern Gerontological Society or Georgia Gerontology Society. It doesn't exclude you from being selected if you're not a member, but we're just curious about how many members versus non-members would be presenting at the conference. The next step, step 2 in the process, you can go back and forth through these at any point. You can go back in and proof and edit. There's no, you don't just submit it and it's gone. You can consistently go back into your dashboard and review and change it up until the deadline. But here's where you would enter your title of your presentation, and in the text box you would enter your abstract. Now, important to note, if you do copy and paste from Word, sometimes Word has invisible formatting that makes symbols appear in very weird places. The ampersand is the weirdest symbol we see put in the strangest of places, and it's from that formatting within Word. So my advice to everyone is copy and paste it into Notepad first. That will remove all the Word formatting from it. Then copy paste it from Notepad, and you won't have any of those strange symbols take over that sometimes become a problem when copy pasted directly from Word or Word, whatever word processor you're using. And that's it for this step. Once you have that in, you can see where at the bottom it says words and character count. It'll tell you when you've used up all your space. Going back up here for the submission detail, number 3, this step here is basically going to ask you to pick a track. One of the tracks, and these all have very strong detail on our website and our call for abstracts. So you would pick the one that you feel best aligns with your topic. The presentation type, there's quite a few here. There's student paper, student poster, professional poster, academic paper, applied workshop, panel symposium, and we have this year what's called mini wellness workshops. We're going to have people that will be doing self-care types of sessions like yoga, tai chi, aromatherapy. So those will be offered. So that's also an option for the abstracts portal. Again, here it asks for the presenter's biography, the 3 learning outcomes, if you're a first-time presenter or not. That helps us know if you need someone to make you feel comfortable in the conference experience, whether we can tie you up with a mentor, and if you have any specific room requests. For some of our workshop presenters, they want their room set up in more of a round table experience, or they would like an open space to do exercises. Those are instructions you would leave in this spot. Obviously, at this point, you would hit save and continue with your submission if you wanted to keep going. There is a step here that encourages you to proofread your abstract materials. And of course, I haven't entered anything here yet, but this is where you would review it. And when you're ready, you hit the submit button. It's super easy. Up here on the left side, you'll see an author home button, but this basically brings you to your dashboard, and you are welcome to submit multiple abstracts. There's no, you can only submit one or one type. You can submit something for all types of abstract for presentations at this conference. And here you would see all of your different submissions, the status, which will change once it's submitted. It will change once it's in review. It will change once it's been accepted or if it's not been accepted. So this is a really neat way to just kind of keep track of what's going on with the abstract. Is there any questions about the software process at this point that I can help with?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Sure. And we do have other people that have joined us since we started, and I just wanted to take a second and tell them how grateful we are that they've joined us and how we hope this is being an effective tool for you to use, and feel free to pop in with questions or comments at any point. Well, like I said, we picked Miro software this year because it is so easy to use, and there's just nowhere you can really get caught up with too many things. But the welcome is, of course, always to connect with me immediately if you have any questions or concerns, and my information is on the left side of the screen on Mira. It basically says if you need to connect with us, to send an email, the deadline, and of course, information about those abstracts on our website. And that's all I have to contribute at this point, unless there's more questions. Well, I hear crickets, so I'm going to open it up for one final moment before we conclude the webinar to just anyone who has any questions about anything that we haven't already covered. Debbie, did we get it all?
I believe we did. I think this has been very helpful. Thank you, guys.
Great. And of course, for those of you who are on the call that aren't familiar with the Southern Gerontological Society, I would be remiss in not inviting you to experience our conference and our organization. We are not exclusive to the Southern region. We focus on the power of place. Graham is a big testament to how important that is, but we are interested in the work that anybody is doing and provide a place for cross-table dialogue between practitioners and academics, but students and older adults as well. And we try to make our conference a very engaging and welcoming experience. And if you have any questions about the organization, please feel free to connect with me at any time. You can do that through my email, which is admin@southerngerontologicalsociety.org, or my phone number is 866-920-4660. Turner, Graham, any final words?
I can't think of anything. There's not any questions. I feel like Graham just covered absolutely everything I can think of.
Yeah,
Well, I know that a lot of presentations and organizations don't want you to submit an abstract if the study hasn't been completed. But with Graham saying if you're in the midst of analyzing it and there's some emerging findings, that should not prohibit you from submitting. So just be aware of that. It's preferable to include some results in your abstract.
I noticed one of the preliminary questions that was phrased to us as presenters in this webinar was the idea of, if my work is already published, can I still present on it at the conference? That's a kind of tricky one. Many people have a paper that maybe is in press, and by the time of the conference, it's actually published. This differs among different folks, so you get different views from different directions. But my sense is that it's actually okay to publish on something that was recently published, and to submit an abstract for something recently published, particularly if it's in an area that the people at that conference might not have access to otherwise. Like most of us, I don't read 150 different journals all the time. And so if I'm presenting on something that would be of interest to the audience of the conference, then if it's something I've already published, as long as it's not 50 years ago, something I've already published, that's okay, particularly if I can put a new twist on it. So it was something that was published in a journal of economics, and it was on economics of aging and somehow. Well, basically, you can reframe something you've published, and you can actually elaborate on it a little bit. Questions are arising from such and such. Well, the first part of your presentation is what you already published. But out of that comes the original things, which is questions for discussion in the workshop, or issues that you want to talk about that are on the poster part of it. So it's a kind of a gray area, or you have to be careful about self-plagiarizing and so on. But I would argue overall, if it's something you've published, that it's number one, a new audience, or number two, you've tweaked it to develop it towards some new ideas, then it can be beneficial not only to the audience, but also to you as you're developing the idea for your next paper.
This is Turner. I did want to say that don't feel like you can only submit on research study findings. I know that this conference, SGS, we like to engage other people besides academic researchers. So if you want to present about an emerging program or pilot, or development, some partnerships, I think you should feel comfortable doing that and submitting something that is what you're doing, but may not be more cut and dry and traditional research per se.
And that, Turner, was one of the reasons why in the document that we produced that we made accessible to folks, we talked about problem statement and issue statement. And the issue could be something totally unrelated to research, particularly in the Southern Gerontological Society.
And hi, everybody. This is Kim McCrae. I joined in the middle of your presentation. I'm sorry. But I am with GGS, the Georgia Gerontology Society, and this has been really helpful. Did you record this, or are the handouts going to be available?
Both. We have recorded it, and we'll go ahead and put up Graham's PowerPoint slides in just as soon as we can figure out that technology process, hopefully within the next couple of days.
Awesome. And I just want to add, as a question and clarification, and a way to even expand what you're saying, since the whole and you might have said it earlier, but since the whole focus is on trying to bridge research, policy, and practice, we will have a lot of practitioners and elders and stuff there. So I'm just emphasizing what you were just saying about that, so that people aren't feeling intimidated if they're not exactly researchers.
Right. Kim, that's the exact reason for this call. We of course want to make sure our students have the appropriate mentorship, but this really is intended for anyone who may not have ever had formal training in submitting an abstract, which I know is intimidating. Even as a baby academician, which I am, I still fight with all sorts of concerns. Am I doing this correctly? This looks really very, professional and polished, and I just want to do a workshop on gardening techniques in raised beds. I mean, and that's so important for us to make sure everybody is aware that those are as welcome as the most stoic academic papers. We have a place for everybody at this conference for that reason, because sometimes it's really neat to go learn about some of those applied practices or policy that we don't get exposure to because we are in the classroom or working on research in a different direction. So I thank you for adding that. I'm very much grateful that you're here with us today.
Awesome.
I'd like to reinforce that too. What I get out of going to SGS, for example, is mostly I get out of my interaction with practitioners and with people in the field and people actually doing stuff. And I think an increasing number of people who are academics enjoy presenting at conferences where they can do that and they can learn from practitioners and people in the field.
Having talked with Jennifer Kraft Morgan about this, I've been real involved in the Culture Change Network of Georgia, and a lot of the folks that we are trying to motivate and get interested and excited about presenting aren't academics. They're people who are, coming at it from different angles. So I really am thrilled about the opportunity for all of us who are concerned and passionate about this field to come together and really see how we can learn from each other and expand the whole space. I think it's going to be really awesome, and I think it's going to be a really rich, growing experience for everybody to be able to come together in a kind of a different way. So I love the vision of what you guys are putting together.
That's exciting to hear. We went into this with a lot of reservations about how this was going to all work, and we're so excited at the graciousness of the culture that is Georgia Gerontology Society and allowing us to do this together, because Georgia is so forward on their practice and policy, and so many of our other states that are within the SGS network are not, and to have them be able to present the spotlight of what's working well in that state, I just think will do wonders for people who come from other states to be able to take that back with them. I'm super excited for that.
Yay!
Yay! All right. Well, is there anything else anybody would like to add? We're right at an hour. I respect your time, and I think we've done wonderful things with this session. I'll let you guys have a second to add any other questions or comments.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate all the help and guidance and encouragement that you guys are offering us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie. You're amazing. All right, well, I will go ahead and conclude the meeting by thanking Dr. Graham Rolls from University of Kentucky and Dr. Turner Goins from Western Carolina University, as well as the SGS student representative Debbie Yoder from Georgia State University. And I will sign this meeting off now by thanking all of you for joining us. We hope to see you very soon. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.